We had this guy one time, biggest deadbeat in the world. I mean, he had more excuses. So I had one of my guys grab him one time. We lifted the hood of the car. We put his face near the fan blade, closed the hood on his head. Then I'd have the guy go in there and step on the gas. You know. The fan would just, nick his chin. It was like giving him a close shave. He paid. He paid real quick. I don't want to sound like a tough guy because I'm really not a tough guy. I just never let fear permeate my being. I have no control over what's going to happen, when I'm going to get killed, when I'm going to die. I just have no control. So I just say don't worry about it.
Have you ever felt loyalty to anybody?
Me. Every time I shave, I feel really loyal.
The first bebop, the real bebop. So let me talk about Diz and Bird, giving the word, defining how a beat could be so complete. Playing with ferocity, thinking with velocity about ornithology and anthropology and even epistrophe. And this is real history, a jazz thing. Charlie Parker to Branford and Winter Marsalis, jazz baby helps keep the living in balance. Shouts to Jimmy Smith and my man Reuben Wilson. You know I'm a fan, I understand what you was feeling. Singing with them Hammond keys, innovative OGs. You touch so many across lands and seas. Donald Byrd, Roy Ayers, and Ramsey Lewis, Freddie Hubbard, Herbie Hancock. Now that's music, Stanley Clarke. To Stanley Jordan, contributions of jazz remain mad important. Sarah Vaughan, Phoebe Snow, and Nancy Wilson, Ella Fitzgerald, and Cassandra Wilson, George Benson, and Lonnie Liston Smith, Spyro Gyra, the Crusaders. Oh man, what a list! I can go on and on. The days and nights, jazz baby, it's hot like Cajun rice, a jazz thing. Supreme, he was the cream. Oh yes, he was the wise one. The impression of Afro blue and of the promise that was not kept. He was a giant step. And there was Ornette Coleman. He was another soul man. The original invisible, playing great music. A jazz thing, a jazz thing.
The name of the town is Cicero, and the mobster that moved in was Al Capone. That was in the 1920s, when Capone and his gangsters were looking for a safe and protected place and moved their headquarters from Chicago to Cicero, when Cicero first got married to the mob. It's been a long time since the law caught up with Capone, but as you'll see, the mob's chokehold on everything from gambling to government, what Capone started more than 80 years ago, may not yet be gone.
They don't come any bigger than Alphonse Capone.
Al Capone was the first, but hardly the last of the big-name mob bosses who controlled the rackets in Cicero. There was Frank Nitti, Capone's enforcer and hand-picked successor, Sam Momo Giancana, whose friendships included John Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe, and Tony Big Tuna Accardo, the most feared and respected of all mob bosses. Nearly 40 years ago, this was how Cicero is described by the Cook County State's Attorney.
I characterized Cicero in 1961 as being a walled city of the syndicate.
Back in 1989, that wall began to crack. The man on the left in this IRS surveillance tape is Cicero native Bill Jehoda, who for 10 years was one of the mob's top bookies.
I was in the gambling department. I'm in the mob's hospitality wing, or the entertainment division. But let me tell you, gambling is a very dangerous and competitive line of work. There were 3 murders on my shift that I was aware of that related to gambling.
And 2 of those murders, you drove the men to what ended up being their final destination.
In two of those cases, I was what would be considered the setup guy. I steered the men to the place where they were ultimately killed.
Not long after that, Bill Jehoda became a government informant, and his testimony helped convict 20 members of a gambling crew headquartered in Cicero. When his work was done, Jehoda left town a marked man. Welcome to Town Hall.
Good to be back. This brings back memories.
So when he returned home at our request to talk about the mob and Cicero, he did so with plenty of security.
The mob controlled Town Hall. It wasn't necessarily who was in there, it was who the mob put in there.
To look the other way at women.
Correct.
And that applied to the police department or any other part of the government?
Absolutely, from one end of the building to the other.
According to Jehoda, in the 1980s and 1990s, the mob's man at Town Hall was trustee Frank Maltese. In 1988, Frank Maltese married his longtime girlfriend, Betty Loren, with some of the mob's top men in attendance. 3 years later, a federal grand jury indicted Frank Maltese on gambling and racketeering charges. Maltese pled guilty to those federal charges, but died before he could be sent to prison, but not before pulling off what some consider his best political fix. In a closed-door meeting with other town trustees, Frank Maltese pulled the strings to have his wife, who had never been elected to any office, named the president of the town of Cicero.
Good afternoon, Cicero Town Hall.
Today, up on the second floor of Town Hall is where you will find Betty Loren-Maltese, Cicero's former liquor commissioner, who has a penchant for big hair and false eyelashes. Despite being married to a mobster, she took office and vowed to change Cicero's mob image.
Every community has a problem, but apparently we get the notoriety because everybody knows the name Cicero. Everybody. You can go out of state. Some people in southern states say, oh my God, Cicero. They assume that there's hitmen and machine guns on the streets.
Since 1993, Betty Loren-Maltese has closed down strip joints, taken on street gangs, and 3 years ago, she set out to reform Cicero's police department, which by her own account was corrupt. After a nationwide search, she found the man to do the job in Joplin, Missouri. David Niebuhr was the chief there when he got a call from a recruiter.
He described the location, the type of crime, type of government that they had previously had, and I told him, you got to be talking about Cicero, and if you think I would go to Cicero, Illinois, you have to be stark raving mad.
What changed his mind, Niebuhr said, was a talk he had with the town president.
I mean, this was discussed specifically with Betty, is that no one, if I find that they are involved in corruption, is untouchable.
When you said that to Betty Loren-Maltese, that if I find corruption, that person's going to get it, what did she say?
She agreed to every one of the terms.
And so he accepted. And it wasn't long before Niebuhr said he started to find things that appeared corrupt. For instance, there was ram towing, which, after submitting the low bid, got the exclusive contract to tow cars in Cicero. Is there a lot of money to be made in a towing contract of this size?
An unbelievable amount of money made in police tows in any metropolitan community.
Ram got that contract after being in business just 1 week, and over the next 2 years, Ram Towing, along with its sister company, gave over $30,000 to the political campaign of Betty Loren-Maltese. Did you ever say to her, I believe there's corruption going on in Ram Towing with the city?
Yeah, I told her that, and I told her about some other activities that I believe corruption existed.
When you began seeing the other specters of corruption, did organized crime intrude on that landscape as well?
I received a lot of information from people about where organized crime was involved in the town of Cicero and in government.
And he said he learned firsthand that the mob might be in his own police station.
The day that I really believed that organized crime fingers were in town government for sure was 2 days after we seized some illegal poker machines, sting operation, which I had ordered.
Poker machines have been notorious as organized crime vehicles for making money.
Yes.
The machines were put in a secured property room at the police station. But 2 days later, Niebuhr said, someone used a key to enter the room and empty the money out of the machines.
That is scary.
Scary because?
It appeared to me that organized crime was reaching out and touching someone, and in this case, me and the Cicero Police Department.
So Niebuhr said he went to Betty Loren-Maltese and told her about yet another area of corruption.
I asked Betty then to make poker machines illegal in the town of Cicero, as many towns have done.
What did she say?
And she refused to do it.
Niebuhr said he couldn't give us any more specifics than that because he was ordered not to share too much information with us. And who told him that? The FBI did. The FBI had already bugged Town Hall in their ongoing corruption probe in which Betty Loren-Maltese was one of the targets. Niebuhr said the FBI told him they needed his help in their still current investigation. Ram Towing said through its attorney that it has done nothing wrong, and that's what this man said as well. Merrick Rail was Cicero's special legal counsel. When Niebuhr made his allegations of corruption, Merrick Rail investigated at Betty Loren-Maltese's request and said he found no wrongdoing.
I didn't hear about any, and I certainly didn't see it, and it's not my sense, having worked with those folks, that they were corrupt in any fashion.
In any organized crime, mob-related
Certainly
faction?
in any organized crime or mob connection. I mean, I saw none of that, heard none of it, smelled none of it.
Merrick Rail served as Cicero's special legal counsel for a year and a half. Besides investigating Niebuhr's claims, his other principal job was to catch fire and police officers who violated the town's residency requirements. His bill for a year and a half was $1.5 million. That's a lot of legal cost, isn't it?
Well, it's a lot of legal work that triggers a cost.
You made a contribution to Betty Loren-Maltese's political
Absolutely,
fund.
I did. I think the total came out to something like $23,000.
Actually, it came out to more like $34,000 for a year and a half. And it was about $2,000 a month. Should we believe there's a correlation between the money you're getting for your legal services to the money that is going into a political fund?
I wouldn't draw that inference if I were you, but you could believe what you want.
Merrick Rail said Betty Loren-Maltese fired him because his bills were too high. His replacement, a personal friend of the president, charged even more.
Did it hurt? Sure it did. Did I like the work? Sure I did. Do I like her? Absolutely. It wasn't pleasant.
It wasn't pleasant and it hurt, so why do you still like her?
I think she has done a tremendous job as president of the town of Cicero. And I think lesser people would have walked away from that job because of the constant turmoil, the constant bad press.
Would it be too harsh to suggest that you might have 1.5 million reasons to still like her?
It would be harsh to suggest that, yes.
Just 4.5 months after Betty Loren-Maltese hired David Niebuhr to reform the Cicero Police Department, she fired him. Niebuhr is now suing. He was dismissed, he said, after turning over documents to the FBI, which he says show a pattern of fraud.
That night, 5 members of the police department showed up at my house, seized my car, uniforms, ammunition, and served me with a letter from Betty saying that I could no longer represent myself as a employee of the town of Cicero in any capacity.
Madam President, would you stop and speak with us for a moment?
No, Carol, I won't.
But could we speak about how some town money is being spent in Cicero?
This is not the place, Carol.
Betty Loren-Maltese never did talk to us. In a written statement, the town's attorney said, quote, the exclusively negative nature of the topic submitted for discussion could only serve to harm the improving image of the town of Cicero. but she did talk to WBBM TV in Chicago back in April of 1998.
In fact, does the town have a problem? Are there investigations going on? Yes. Will there always be? I think yes, because we're Cicero.
People in Cicero say enough already of Al Capone. You know, it's not the way it's been characterized.
Well, the man's been dead for 50 years, but the legend lives on.
And the name of Frank Maltese lives on as well. Betty Loren-Maltese dedicated the town's public safety building in honor of her husband, the late mob felon. Refers to him as this man of opportunity, this man of peace.
Frank was an opportunist. I definitely give him credit for that. He was a schemer.
Jehoda's testimony, which helped convict Frank Maltese, was a blow to the outfit, but it was hardly fatal. The man who now runs the day-to-day operation of the Chicago mob, according to authorities, is this man, Johnny Apes Monteleone, a former Cicero resident.
I learned the hard way that Al Capone really never left Cicero. I believe that the organization still exists in Cicero.
Cicero is still mobbed up?
Oh, yes.
Without question.
Yes.
Well, these days is in the television ratings with The Sopranos. Everywhere else, La Cosa Nostra has been decimated by gangland killings and federal prosecutions, with an entire generation of mobsters either knocking each other off or ratting each other out. Nowhere is that more evident than in Philadelphia, where a former cop turned mobster turned government witness has helped send more than 50 made members of his family and their associates to prison. Big Ron Previte didn't do it to save his own neck. He did it for nearly $1 million. In many ways, Previte's career embodies the waning days of La Cosa Nostra in America, where the only honor left is survival.
My occupation has been crook most of my life.
At 6 feet, 300 pounds, with a physical presence and a wise guy persona, Previte certainly fits the stereotype of organized crime, and it's no wonder. He grew up in Philadelphia, a second-generation Sicilian American, and some of his earliest memories are of gangsters.
I used to see guys that were bookmaking, doing things, driving Cadillacs back then. They used to wear the fedoras, and I guess that's what I aspired to be, so to speak. I didn't want to be an astronaut, you know.
You wanted to be a gangster?
I wanted to be in that world. I wanted to, it's a shame to say, I always wanted to do wrong.
And he did. Even when he was in the Air Force, he was a petty thief and black marketeer. And as a member of the Philadelphia police force, then known for its corruption and brutality, he fit right in.
I was a crook in the police department. I robbed everything I could. But by the same token, I liked making arrests, too. I got accommodations. I had a good work record, except I was a crook. But most of the people I worked with were crooks.
Really?
I never learned about crime till I went in the police department. I always said that I really became an adept thief when I went in the Philadelphia Police Department.
He learned how to shake down pimps and drug dealers, collect payoffs from bookmakers and mobsters, pocketing thousands of dollars a week in addition to his regular paycheck.
It was a nice life. It was good. And plus, I had the badge. I couldn't get in any trouble.
So why'd you quit?
Well, I don't think I quit. I think it was a mutual thing. I wore out my welcome, so to speak.
So you left by mutual agreement, the Philadelphia Police Department. What did you do next?
I think the next legitimate job I had was at the casino in Atlantic City, Tropicana.
And what was your job there?
Security. Fox in the hen house.
It was 1981. Gambling in Atlantic City had just been legalized, but there was still plenty of opportunity for the enterprising criminal. He stole truckloads of furniture and bar supplies out of the casino's warehouse, cleaned out the guest safety deposit boxes, and ran poker games and prostitutes out of unoccupied hotel suites, making what he calls big money. What are we talking about?
The end result was millions. I took millions from the casino.
Did the hotel know that you were taking the money?
Well, they couldn't prove it, you know.
His success attracted the attention of two powerful organizations, the mob, which wanted tribute in the form of $500 every week, and the New Jersey State Police, which offered him income in exchange for information about the criminal underworld in Atlantic City. So did they give you like an envelope full of cash every week?
Yeah, I used to meet them somewhere, and they'd bring me the cash.
It's almost like they were paying you tribute.
Yeah, I guess they were. But don't forget, I'm giving them information, too.
Yeah.
They can't operate without informants.
When you develop this relationship with the state police, they tell you got to go straight?
Listen, they didn't recruit me in the seminary or at the parish hall. Why would they want me to go straight? What kind of information are they going to get from me if I go straight?
By the mid-1980s, his lucky streak at the Tropicana had run out. They actually paid him to go away. And for the next 6 years, he ran his own criminal enterprise with a crew of old buddies from Hamilton, New Jersey. He recalls those days as the happiest of his life.
I was just like a general practitioner of crime. I didn't specialize in anything.
Did you ever go to prison?
No, not really.
How'd you avoid that?
I guess I was smart. I used whatever I could to stay out. I used whatever connections I had. Because you're a criminal doesn't mean you have to go to jail, you know?
Only the bad ones go to jail.
Only the stupid ones go to jail.
Eventually, Previte's bookmaking operation caught the eye of mob boss Homicide John Stanfa, who wanted a piece of the action. By 1993, Previte was such a big earner for the Philadelphia mob, Stanfa made him his personal driver, enforcer, and a made member of La Cosa Nostra. All of a sudden, you got a lot on your plate.
Got a lot on my plate. Too much on my plate. Extortions, bookmaking, attempted murder, beating people up. I mean, it was a full day of crime from morning to night, you know?
You talk about debt collection, intimidation. What would you do to people?
Different people, different things. Threaten them, you know, beat them up, hit them with baseball bats.
Break their legs?
Break their legs, break their arms, make them feel pain. Sometimes you have to do it because if somebody doesn't see it, everybody thinks they can stiff you.
But not many people stiffed Ron Previte.
We had this guy one time, biggest deadbeat in the world. I mean, he had more excuses. So I had one of my guys grab him one time. We lifted the hood of the car. We put his face near the fan blade, closed the hood on his head. Then I'd have the guy go in there and step on the gas. Oh, you know. The fan would just, you know, nick his chin. It was like giving him a close shave. He paid. He paid real quick.
Do you consider yourself a nice guy?
In what context am I a nice guy? I told you before that I was a crook. How could a crook be a nice guy? I didn't find it profitable to be a nice guy in my life.
Did you ever kill anybody?
No.
Never?
No.
You're morally opposed to it, or?
You know, money's not a reason to kill somebody. You make me mad, I could kill you. You fool my family, I could kill you. I'm not going to kill you for money.
He was probably 20 years too late. He'd have been a great gangster in the 50s.
George Anastasia is one of the most respected crime reporters in the country. He's covered La Cosa Nostra for the Philadelphia Inquirer for 20 years.
Oh, man.
He found Previte such an interesting character, he's written a new book about him called The Last Gangster.
He knew how to work in the underworld. He knew how to make money. He knew how to use fear, intimidation, and intelligence and sophistication to generate income.
Anastasia says Previte was a throwback to old-style mobsters like Angelo Bruno and Carlo Gambino from the days when La Cosa Nostra bragged that it was bigger than U.S. Steel.
In a lot of ways, Bruno in Philadelphia, Gambino in New York, they probably, in another time, in another place, could have been the CEO of a company. But, you know, the best and the brightest in the Italian-American community are not gangsters anymore. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're entertainers or whatever. And so you're scraping the bottom of the gene pool.
Perhaps the best example was Skinny Joey Merlino, a particularly vicious mobster obsessed with his own public image.
Joey was a party guy. He liked to go out. He liked to drink. He liked to gamble. He liked the high life.
Merlino patterned himself after New York City's John Gotti and seemed more interested in making headlines than making money. He invited TV crews to his annual Christmas party for the homeless and was a regular fixture at the city's nightclubs, restaurants, and sporting events.
Joey always was calling attention to himself, and he got under the skin of law enforcement. If Gotti was GQ, these guys were details or Maxim, you know, the MTV gangsters. Very, very attuned to the media. They liked the media attention, and it all contributed to their downfall.
To top it all off, Previte says Merlino and his associates weren't very good at what they did.
They weren't gangsters. They were crooks, thieves. I always figured I developed crime. I did this or did that, and I worked it. They didn't work anything. They just wanted to rob everybody and their own people.
Surrounded by what he thought were incompetents, Previte began to worry about his future.
When he got into the top of the organization, he looked around and he said, you know, I'm not going to survive. They're going to kill me, I'm going to kill them, or we're all going to go to jail. So being the intelligent individual that he was and the mercenary that he was, he said, you know, I got to have an insurance policy.
That insurance policy was the FBI. His friends at the New Jersey State Police had made the introduction back in 1992, and Previte had been feeding them dribs and drabs of information as a paid informant. Finally, in 1997, the Bureau told him that it could not protect him forever and convinced him to become a cooperating witness. Previte wore a wire for more than 2.5 years, recording more than 400 hours of conversation, many of them with bosses and underbosses.
Then that guy puts it on TV. He don't get his facts straight. So he puts on there 5 families. Now there ain't no 5, you know? There is no city commission. There is no money reaching out.
John Terry, who now heads the FBI's Organized Crime Division in Philadelphia, was Previte's handler.
I mean, how dangerous was that for him?
It was extremely dangerous. On any given day, if any member or associate of the mob found out that he was wearing a recording device for the FBI, he would have been a target for death. His life was and is in jeopardy.
But Previte was well compensated, cutting one of the best deals in the history of the FBI. $9,000 a month, a car, insurance, and various expenses. It quickly added up.
We paid Mr. Previte $750,000 beginning in 1992 and ending in 2002.
You had no case against Previte?
Correct.
He was doing this of his own volition?
That's correct.
For money?
For money.
In addition, the FBI gave Previte seed money for drug deals, bookmaking, and loan sharking operations, with the understanding that any proceeds would be returned to the FBI.
His history is that he's stolen from everybody he's ever worked for. Did he steal from you?
No, not as far as I'm aware of. I mean, we calculated what we thought the value of his information and services were to the FBI, and we paid him for it.
The FBI says it was worth it. With Previte's help, the government managed to convict more than 50 made members of the Philadelphia mob and their associates, including 3 mob bosses and the mayor of Camden, New Jersey.
I think I was underpaid. I should have made more money. I took a chance every day. I was like jumping out of airplanes every day. When I hear people say how much money I made, well, you go do it. You go do it. Strap that thing on and, you know, go in a viper's pit every day.
It's almost, if you're going to survive in the underworld today, this is what you got to do. You got to look out for yourself, and it's no longer about loyalty and honor and a sense of organization. It's about, you know, I guess in a lot of ways it's like America, number one. You know, look out for yourself.
Which is exactly what Ron Previte is doing today. He didn't trust the Justice Department to protect him and didn't want them to tell him where or how he was going to live, so he opted not to go into the witness protection program. The FBI's John Terry thinks he's taking a big risk.
Why did he decide not to do it?
I don't think he felt as though he could live under the guidelines that are in place for that program. They're very strict guidelines.
Do you think there are people that would like to see him dead?
Absolutely.
You think they're looking for him?
I'm not going to comment on that.
I don't want to sound like a tough guy because I'm really not a tough guy. I just never let fear permeate my being. I have no control over what's going to happen, when I'm going to get killed, when I'm going to die. I just have no control. So I just say don't worry about it.
Have you ever felt loyalty to anybody?
Me. Every time I shave, I feel really loyal.
Years, but never one quite like Milton Milan. Without so much as a high school education, he rose from the streets to become mayor of Camden, New Jersey, and a symbol of hope in one of the poorest and most corrupt cities in the country. He was the local boy who made good, for a while anyway, until his past began to catch up with him. It's a past that epitomizes the problems with Camden, a city so beyond helping itself that last week the governor of New Jersey announced a plan to strip its elected officials of most of their powers and to literally take over the city. Camden, New Jersey sits directly across the Delaware River from Philadelphia. It was once a thriving city, the home of Walt Whitman and industries like RCA and Campbell's Soup. But today, its only distinction is being the second poorest city in the United States and one of the most violent. There are block after block of boarded up and abandoned buildings. Camden is so poor, the Peace Corps trains volunteers here for third world conditions. The only businesses to speak of are the ones no one else wants: a new trash incinerator, 2 prisons, a sewage treatment plant, and a thriving drug trade.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
4 years ago, Camden voters decided to elect a mayor with first-hand knowledge of the city's problems.
Let's get busy.
34-year-old Milton Milan was certainly an unlikely choice. A political novice, he'd only been elected to the city council 2 years before. In his 20s, he'd been arrested for marijuana possession and aggravated assault. But if anything, his unusual past seemed to give him a certain amount of credibility with many of Camden's voters.
Did you ever think you might be mayor?
Never. I never thought I was hoping I'd get through high school.
Like most people in Camden, he never did. Instead, he spent 6 years in the Marine Corps, returning to the city in 1985 to work in a shoe store and later start a construction company. It wasn't long before he earned a reputation as a political maverick who could get things done.
This is my old house here, 819 North 5th Street, right here.
He grew up here in North Camden, one of the city's roughest neighborhoods. Drug deals and drive-by shootings were part of the landscape.
The drug that was out there then was heroin and marijuana, and it was everywhere. It was every one of these corners in between the alleys.
There had always been rumors that Milan himself was a drug dealer peddling cocaine right here in his old neighborhood. Rumors the mayor categorically denied. Then last year, people began coming forward to make those allegations in public.
Milton was selling drugs in the street. He was just like one of us. He just never got caught.
Luis Medina is a 5-time convicted felon serving a 15-year sentence for drug dealing and weapons possession. He grew up with Milan and in 1988 gave him a job at his store, Luis Fashion Shoes. Medina says the store was little more than a front for drug dealing, and Milan, he says, was an active participant.
I want you to look me in the eye. You believe that Milton Milan was a drug dealer?
No doubt. Why? I don't have to believe it. I know it.
How do you know that?
Because apparently when I gave him 5 ounces and say, here, do what you got to do, he did it.
You gave him drugs to sell?
Yes.
And he came back and gave you money?
Yeah.
So he was selling drugs for you?
No, he was selling for himself.
So how does a drug dealer get to be mayor of Camden?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out so I can be mayor. I'm trying to find out.
Medina wasn't the only one making those allegations. Last year, 5 other dealers testified under oath that the mayor used to sell drugs in Camden. Milan just shrugged it off, saying, look who's making the allegations.
So you think you have much more credibility than they do?
I know that I do.
Did you know Luis Medina was a drug dealer?
No, I did not.
Did you stay out of trouble during those years?
Absolutely.
But that question is still under investigation. Just 2 weeks before the mayoral election, this story broke in the Philadelphia Inquirer, saying Milan was a suspect in an unsolved murder of a heroin dealer named Francisco Chamorro.
It happened on this street corner on Christmas Eve, 1988. Chamorro was parking his red Cadillac on the street when he was approached by 3 men wearing black ski masks. A witness described one of the men as being tall, heavy-set, and carrying an M16. When they got within a few feet of the car, they opened fire. Later, police found 82 shell casings on the ground. Although the coroner said Chamorro's body was so badly riddled with bullets, it was impossible to tell how many times he'd been shot.
Police say Milan had a running feud with one of Chamorro's friends and had badly beaten up the man a few weeks earlier. Milan also reportedly told a woman that he had been involved in the killing and needed a place to hide the guns.
Did you ever tell a woman at a New Year's Eve party that you were involved in that murder and that you actually shot the wrong guy?
No, absolutely not. What it sounds like to me, Steve, is that you've gotten yourself a set of bad notes.
Actually, the notes we were working from were copies of the original police report in the Chamorro murder case. And while there may not be enough evidence yet to convict anyone for the crime, it does point to the mayor as a prime suspect.
It's an old story where I was asked questions that I didn't know the answer to, or individuals who I didn't know, and I was released and never, for the next 10, 11 years, never heard of it again.
Did you happen to be hooked up to a polygraph test?
Sure I was. I volunteered to do that, absolutely.
How'd you do?
I was never told.
We're told that you flunked it miserably.
You're told that, the media was told that.
Here is police document signed by Sergeant Ray Clark with the homicide unit, saying after the polygraph examination, Detective Upshaw reported that Milton Milan had failed all questions concerning the death of Francisco Chamorro. There it is.
Doesn't mean anything.
You think it's an old story?
Sure it is.
It may be an old story, but Camden County Prosecutor Lee Solomon says there's no statute of limitations for murder.
Is this still an active investigation?
Absolutely. Even as of the last few days.
Do you expect that there will be indictments?
We will solve this crime.
Has there been anything developed that would rule the mayor out as a suspect?
Nobody that's been questioned in connection with this homicide has been ruled out as a suspect. I can't say that more.
If you had ruled somebody out, could you tell me?
Yes.
Even in Camden, a candidate for mayor under suspicion for murder was a new twist, but the voters elected him anyway. And as mayor, he delivered on some of his promises. He increased trash pickups to twice a week and also helped develop Camden's waterfront, leading the fight to bring the World War II battleship USS New Jersey here as a permanent museum. As for rumors he dealt drugs and was involved in a murder, he blames politics and the local police, who he says have it in for him.
That's where most of my frustration comes from, that I've been, basically persecuted and I've been condemned to be a second-class citizen because of where I come from, because of the people that I knew, because of the folks that I was raised around.
Your accusers would say it's not who you are or where you're from, it's what you did.
Well, then the question is, what did I do? The question is, what did I do?
As it turns out, the Justice Department had a very long answer to that question. Last spring, after federal agents raided his home and his office at City Hall, a federal grand jury handed down a 19-count indictment. And last November, Milan went on trial for a laundry list of crimes.
He's on the mob's payroll. He's stealing money from the political fund. He's engaged in insurance fraud.
U.S. Attorney Robert Cleary says Milan first came to the Fed's attention during the investigation of Philadelphia's mafia boss, Ralph Natale, who is trying to get his hands on some of the $2 billion in state and federal aid that's poured into Camden during the last 5 years and was controlled by city officials. With the FBI listening, Natale referred to Milan as our guy and a sweetheart. And in court, Natale testified that he gave the mayor between $30,000 and $50,000 in bribes.
Mr. Natale ever give you any money?
No, absolutely not.
Well, according to this tape he did, says the mayor, I can't be seen with him anymore. He'll do anything in the world for me. We took care of him. I gave him $3 in the envelope. Did he ever give you $3,000 in an envelope?
I've never received any money from Ralph Natale. Up until the time of the indictments, I didn't know who Ralph Natale was.
I mean, explain the tapes to me. I mean, what are you saying they're fake? How do you explain them?
No, I don't understand. What's your question, Steve?
Well, what do you want me to explain? Here's the mob boss in Philadelphia telling an associate he gave you a bribe.
It's going to.
Why would he say that if it weren't true?
I'm not going to make pretend that I know for him, but if I was a diabolical individual, I certainly would be trying to get people to support me in any way they can, and I would say whatever it takes.
Milan was also accused of laundering $65,000 for one of Camden's most notorious drug traffickers, J.R. Rivera, who's now in custody facing a life sentence.
Do you know J.R. Rivera?
Sure I do.
Another drug dealer.
I believe he's convicted for conspiracy.
Conspiracy of running one of the biggest drug rings in Camden.
Yeah, I'm not defending his point. You asked me if I know him. My answer was yes.
Milan says he borrowed the $65,000 from Rivera in 1994 to help start up his construction company.
So this was just a straight-up business loan from his business to your business?
That's correct. That is correct.
He gave you a certified check?
No, he did not. No, he did not.
My understanding is that this money came to you in cash, in a white sack,
in a Core State Bank carrying bag. Yes, bank case.
Right. You know, most businesses go out and borrow money. They don't get it delivered to them in cash. You know that.
Yes, I know that. I know that today. Yes.
But the government was able to show that Milan laundered the money by breaking it up into smaller amounts that wouldn't have to be reported to the IRS, and then distributed it to friends and family members, who in turn wrote checks back to Milan and Rivera.
Why would you do that if this was a legitimate transaction? Why would you go to a known drug dealer, indeed at that time probably the largest drug dealer in Camden? Why would you go to him for the money?
When we talked to Mayor Milan toward the end of his federal trial, he said it would take too long to explain on 60 Minutes his side of all the allegations.
Why didn't you take the stand in your own defense in the federal trial?
I guess that they're pretty upset with the fact that I didn't take the stand. But the people who took the stand in my defense are the only people that needed to take it.
You called a cop, 2 ministers, and your brother. I mean, that doesn't sound like a vigorous defense.
I don't think that the burden of proof was not on me.
The burden of proof was on the federal government, and it was met. U.S. Attorney Robert Cleary on the courthouse steps announced that the jury had found Milan guilty on 14 of 19 counts.
This was, in short, a smorgasbord of criminal activity. It's over, Milan!
The FBI sent Mayor Milan off in style with a 4-car caravan to the federal detention center just across the Ben Franklin Bridge in Philadelphia. Milan will be sentenced June 15th, and he's expected to receive 9 to 12 years in prison for his crimes. The people of Camden don't seem to be shocked or surprised. Milan is the 3rd Camden mayor in the last 20 years to be convicted on charges of corruption.